Welcome to Fiction at the Friary. My name is Madeleine Darcy. Myself and my co-host Danielle McLaughlin have been running Fiction at the Friary, a monthly fiction event in Cork City since January 2017. And since March of last year, we've been running this online. Hopefully we'll be back in the Friary Bar soon. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Cork City Council, the Arts Council, J. Rapp O'Mara Solicitors and Hogan Architects, and say hello to Mike Darcy, who has hosted us and supported us in the Friary Bar, and we hope to be back there soon. So now I'm going to hand you over to my co-host, Danielle McLaughlin, who's going to introduce our guest author for this month.
We're delighted to have Jamie as our guest author this month. Jamie O'Connell's debut novel, Diving for Pearls, was published earlier this month by Doubleday, and his short stories have featured in a range of journals and also on radio and on TV. His fiction has been highly commended by the Costa Short Story Award and also by the An Post Irish Book Awards Writing.ie Short Story of the Year. He's been longlisted for BBC Radio 4 Opening Lines competition and shortlisted for the Maeve Binchy Travel Award and the Sky Arts Futures Fund. Jamie has an MFA and MA in Creative Writing from University College Dublin and a BA in English Literature and History of Art from University College Cork. Reviewing Diving for Pearls, the Irish Times called it a compelling tale that manages without preaching to say much about the fragility of our globalized, capitalism-soaked world, an often dark and poignant read that will fully engage the reader from the outset. Sunday Independent Life magazine called it an instantly gripping page turner. And the reviewer for Books Ireland said, Jamie O'Connell holds tender control over his story and still brings the literary magic of the written word to the page. I may never go to Dubai, but I won't forget the stories I read here. So we're delighted to have Jamie joining us today. And now I'm going to invite Jamie to read a little for us from Diving for Pearls.
Thank you, Danielle and Madeleine, for that lovely welcome and all those lovely things you said. I'm just going to read from the first chapter of Diving for Pearls, which is the character. The book covers a number of different people who are living in Dubai, but the character we're looking at is Asim, who is a gay Emirati who is actually living in Dublin, but over the course of the book he has to make his way home to Dubai. He really kind of straddles these two worlds of sort of Dubai and a different culture there to, I suppose, the Western world of Dublin. So I shall start. So, Asim Hussein touches his wrist. Tag Heuer Monaco Caliber 12 automatic chronograph. Sounds like a gun, the balance of circles and squares. There is no doubting it. He owns the most beautiful watch in the world. He lifts it close to his face, examining the white lettering. Monaco, what a word, all it suggests. The cream curtains glow in the autumn sunlight, reflecting off the watch's steel finish. Asim tucks his cool arm back under the blanket and gazes sideways. David is asleep on his stomach, and strands of his blonde hair are caught in his stubble. His clothes lie beside the bed. They have a worn, washed in saltwater quality Asim finds curious. The sounds from Pearse Street are muffled, though he makes out the occasional revving of a Dublin bus. David's eyebrows twitch. Sleeping is such a strange thing. All those hours that could be spent reading, shopping, or meeting people. There had to be some drug or treatment that would solve the problem. He lifts the strands of hair off David's face. David's eyes open. He stretches and smiles. Morning. You sleep okay? Asim nods. Breakfast in a bit? David slips his arm under Asim's neck. Yes, though I must go to the library. Me too. Godot awaits. Asim rests his head on David's chest, stroking the hairs, sensing the solid thuds of his heart, the flow of blood from the ventricles to the atria and out of the aorta. He thinks about the synatrial node pulsing. Is it normal, he wonders, that these things come into his head while he's naked in bed? but maybe all RCSI students have these kind of thoughts. Your toes are freezing, David shivers. Asim strokes David's boxers, tracing the line of flesh through the fabric, wondering if he'll slip his hand inside. I'm glad you're back. It's a pity about the new terminal being such a mess. There were people everywhere, sorry about dinner. Asim had spent their date night stuck in Heathrow, his heart sinking as one by one all the flights to Dublin Terminal 2 got delayed. Imagining David in the apartment, checking his phone, wonder if he should cancel Le Goulaton. How was your brother? David asked. No different. Asim gazes at the empty glass on the bedside table. His lunch with Mahmoud and Mama in the Kensington restaurant had been the same as all the others. All that talking without saying anything, it was hardly worth him flying over to London.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was wonderful. It's a beautiful book, and it's an intricately interwoven tale as well. So we've got loads of questions to ask you. But could I just ask for our viewers one very basic question first? Is Dubai, most of the book is set in Dubai, and you can almost smell it and sense it. It's almost like another character running through the book. How did the idea of writing a novel set in Dubai come about in the first place?
It would have come about in the early 2010s. I had recently graduated from my master's, and a lot of people roughly my age group were kind of graduating into an Ireland that was really down on its knees in 2010. And some of my friends went to Europe, some went to Australia. I went to Australia for a time, and then some went to Dubai. And so over the course of kind of 2010, for a number of years, I was visiting back and forth. Sometimes they had like free flights as part of their jobs, and they're like, oh, come out for a couple of weeks. I was at quite a loose end for a couple of years, as everyone was with the way the economy was here in Ireland. So I actually managed to spend, I'd say, about 8 trips, and sometimes a few weeks at a time going out there. But I think it was the just absolute strangeness of the place compared to the life that I'd grown up in, kind of North Cork, the land of small kind of white bungalows and farms and green fields, and then to just fly. I knew even from the second I saw it for the first time that like that writer's antenna immediately was kind of went up in my head, just the sheer oddness of the place, to have come from the background that I had and to just fly into the city that's quite literally just plonked in the middle of the desert. Like it makes no sense, this kind of world in a place that's 50-degree heat half the year. And so you've like desert, this gleaming city of glass and steel just rising out of this desert. I mean, rising. Most of the buildings are 50 stories plus, you know. What would be considered a skyscraper here would be considered nearly a bungalow out there. And then just more desert. It's kind of very much just placed there. It felt like going more into the future than maybe going 5,000 kilometers. It felt like a sci-fi movie, like if you watched a Star Trek or The Fifth Element, actually was the thing it really reminded me of, the kind of a city. It just needs flying cars and we'd be fully in a different century. So that caught me firstly, and that's definitely where the impulse to write something about it. And at the time, Colin McCann's book had recently been out, Let the Great World Spin, and that kind of great New York novel sort of set in a really interesting time in the 70s. And which was such a place of contradictions as well, because I mean, we've all maybe seen Halston recently, and just the kind of the glamour of the 70s and Studio 54 and people living in this sort of massive way. But then, you know, in the Colin McCann book, we also have the other side of it, the kind of the people living in Brooklyn, and it's really tough, you know, and it's a tough life. And I think what made his portrait of the city so interesting was it's actually a portrait of many cities. One city is many cities. It's many different sides to it at once, and it really depends where you come from, how you experience a city. And there was something in that I wanted to try and capture in Dubai, kind of the 2010s, because it was so different, not even in look, but in outlook. Like everything was so pessimistic in Ireland, because the novel is actually set in late November, which was the week the IMF came to Dublin. It was like the worst moment of the recession, where we literally lost our financial autonomy as a country. But you went to Dubai and people there really thought, like, as much as it has its issues, but people are optimistic. They're like, I'm going to go there, my career will advance, you know, I'll save money, I'll likely be able to buy a house in 5 or 6 years when I return home, nearly cash, you know. So in that way, it was strange to me as well, because I was so surrounded by pessimism and a narrative in the news that was so negative, and to go there and be like that's a positive. I can come out of Dubai, as much as the book definitely has critiques about aspects of Dubai. There's something in that attitude that I found quite refreshing.
It's amazing. It's almost like a Las Vegas, in that there are the really wealthy people, and then there are the staff, as it were. And it's fascinating because it makes me both want to go to Dubai and not want to go to Dubai at the same time. But they're also like, you weave all of these different narrative threads through the novel, and you handle them with such great skill. That must have been quite difficult. Can you tell me how you made decisions on the structure? Was it very difficult? Did you develop the characters first and then filter their stories bit by bit through, or?
I think one thing I'm learning, and you know me for a long time, Madeline, I think my enthusiasm somehow is actually a very negative thing sometimes. That means I go too quickly. I start out of the gate too quickly. Whereas this book took me a long time to find a story. And I think that was the best thing that ever happened. Was it took me sort of a year or two. I think it was probably about 2012 by the time I was like ready to write something. So it was quite, I think your head actually writes a book better than your conscious brain can, if you can kind of give that space to mature in your mind. And I think that's definitely meant that a lot of the bits and pieces had the tangle had sort of become clear as to what kind of structure it would be over 2 years. Where I feel if I just sort of had the inspiration on the plane and then started writing a novel within a couple of weeks, it wouldn't have worked. And I've definitely tried to write longer fiction before, when the inspiration is hot in the first month or two, and actually 40 pages in, it judders to a halt. But in terms of writing, I think probably because I'd been reading and just so interested in the short story for a few years at that point, that the idea of writing something over a very short window of time and just getting slices of these people's lives, or because it only takes place over a week, the whole novel, and then trying to expand out the story using kind of flashback and that, I think it was probably the short story background that meant that this felt like a natural fit to go for that kind of let the great world spin, let the kind of polyphonic novel, as they call it. There was kind of maybe 3 major changes that happened after the draft 1 came about. One was one of the chapters was actually written from a different point of view. Actually, the chapter where Siobhan goes to see the Tom Cruise, well, a film star on the building. That was actually written originally from Rocco's point of view, because actually initially I thought I wanted a point of view of someone who was born there, like someone who has known nothing else. And I thought that'd be quite interesting, because later on, when in the Dubai Brunch chapter, I think there's a line where I say, like, to be comfortable in Dubai, you probably need to be born there. It needs to be kind of all you know. So I wrote that chapter from his point of view, which actually I reverted to Siobhan. And that was because Siobhan just needed more time. Otherwise, she'd have only had 2 chapters, and I needed more time. It was better that I developed Siobhan's character fully. And the other thing was the prologue, the epilogue at the end of the book was much shorter. I think, once again, probably reading short stories and that kind of background meant you can often leave things more open-ended in a short story. People will be okay with that. But my editor was like, people have stuck with your characters for 330 pages. They're going to be raging if you don't give them some kind of an ending. So, and she was right. And I'm really glad that I expanded that out. In a way, it's still quite open-ended, but I definitely, gave a bit more breathing space at the end. So they were the major changes that kind of happened. But I suppose I always would start with character and work on voice and character, and this definitely started with a bunch of characters who one by one kind of were almost whispering to me their stories, or however it's almost like a kind of you're almost like an actor performing them out. I feel sometimes as you're writing, I'm always surprised when a character says something and it surprises me, or does something as I'm writing it, and I kind of go, either I'm shocked by it, or it kind of makes me laugh, or they say something funnier than I would be able to say myself, or you know, something like that happens. So yeah, but I think character is where it starts. Getting the voice right is where it starts with me. And then I remember during my master's being an exercise, a question to ask your character is, if this person was on their deathbed and they had one story to tell and they just could tell one story, is this the story they tell? And that would give you a sense of, okay, well, the story that they're telling me is rich enough territory to turn into, you know, a story, a short story, or in this case, a novel.
And all of your characters, you know, develop throughout this very short space of time. Now, I must admit, it's interesting that you mentioned Siobhan, because I have a sneaking liking for Siobhan because she's quite funny, really. I really see her. She's not the pleasantest of characters, for sure. I mean, I love the other characters as well. You've done the female characters really well, Geta and Lydia. And then Trevor, you know, comes into his own. They're all really interesting characters, but who is your favorite character and why? Or do you have a favorite?
I think Tahir actually is probably my favorite, or Gita as well. Gita, I felt an affinity to, and when writing her, she's quite an ambitious, you know, she's had a certain childhood and she's smart and she's ambitious and like she's keen to make something of her life. And I think I just remember being a teenager and just thinking I was going to go live in New York and, you know, just having these kind of big dreams at the time. So I think when writing her, there's something of myself in that. I'd say Tahir because there's something of him which I didn't realize at the time, and I look back and there's something of my grandfather in him. I just feel family is where it's at for him. You know, he's doing all this to make life better for his daughters and his children, and I suppose I kind of warm to that. Do I think I kind of like them? Like I like them all actually. I mean, I enjoyed spending time with them all. I'd have to say Siobhan was the hardest to write, and not because I didn't like her, but she had it the most comfortable, which makes it harder to make her story compelling. You know, everyone else is in a state of risk, whereas Siobhan's life does feel incredibly safe. And it wasn't until I had to think about, like, what could I do to her that would make her come undone? I needed something compelling, you know, and really her Achilles heel was, I thought, she'll come alive if her kids are in danger. That's the thing where she will become the tigress. And that's why, you know, I then had, well, the story with her is to really put a situation where she's worried about her kids and, you know, there's a danger to her kids. And that's when she starts to really react and kind of come alive. But I do think Siobhan is misunderstood even by herself, because she thinks all this glitz will make her happy. But actually all the happy moments in the book are when she's connecting to her family. And, you know, she's on the phone to her mother. She regrets how things were left with her father. She's worried about Trevor. She wants her marriage with Martin to work. And, you know, her kids are of primary importance. And actually, I don't think she realizes herself that the handbags don't matter. Actually, what's making her life have meaning is human relationships. So
I love the title, Diving for Pearls, as well. And for me, it seems to encapsulate the themes of the novel eloquently, because it is, in fact, a very political novel. And this book shows the kind of folly that human beings are capable of. And I'm wondering, did you have this title in mind from day one, or did it come to you during the creative process?
It was a nightmare to come up with, if I'm honest. I have folders over years of trying to get the right title for probably 4 or 5, like probably from once I started for about 4 years. It was just called Dubai. That was the name of the book, because I felt, you know, if I had to sum it up in a sentence as I was writing it, it's like, this is a portrait of a city. This is a portrait of Dubai in 2010 at a moment, in the same way, as I said, the Colin McCann book was like that. So very much that's, you know, without sounding cliched, it was almost like the 8th character, you know, of the book. But it just wasn't, it was too non-fictiony actually, in terms of, it was quite actually Marianne Mason was like, look, can you think of something else? And, you know, she was obviously giving me examples of other books that she thought might be more, that would give it a fictional edge. I mean, even from the technical aspect of having a book called Dubai appear on a spreadsheet somewhere, people are going to think it's a lonely planet or something. They're not going to, you know, it's actually a challenging. I love those one-word titles. I love Emma. I think it's just a great title because it is Emma's story. It is her transformation over the course of a book. But I think she wanted something more evocative, and I was happy to try things out. And I went through, you know, through quotes, and everything I came up with always seemed to need an explanation almost. You know, it was kind of something that required, and I feel if a title needs a massive explanation, then it's missed the mark, you know. So I'd say this is title number 70. But then when I was trying to find something, I discovered that Dubai had previously been a place where natural pearls were discovered, and people used to go down and dive for pearls, but it's extremely dangerous at the time because they go down, set up to about 100 meters from what I said, with no oxygen tanks or no nothing. But of course, if you found the pearl, you would be made. You know, a natural pearl back 200 years ago was a fortune. So that idea of doing something extremely with a dangerous element, but the hope of rich reward, just naturally fitted to the whole concept of the book, which is, you know, doing something a little risky in the hope that you will come out on top, you know.
Jamie, I was listening to you talking about Siobhan and her glitz there, and it reminded me of how well you create that sense of the excess of Dubai. And I'm not at all surprised to hear that you spent so much time there, because when I read the novel, I thought, oh, he must have spent time in Dubai, because I felt completely like I was there, and you create such a sense of the place. I've never been there, but I felt like I was there when I was reading. And maybe you could read a little snippet for us, just to give us, for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, a sense of that Dubai excess and glitz, perhaps.
So I'm just going to read a section from when Trevor and Siobhan, the Irish family, they go for what is the Dubai brunch, and it happens every Friday there because their weekend is Friday, Saturday. So on Friday, you essentially go to a hotel, you pay in. Now it's quite expensive. It could be 200 euros, 1,000 dirhams to pay into the hotel. But essentially once you're in, you're taken to a table, and a sort of spread is put out. Well, I think the word buffet doesn't cover it. More like Roman feast is probably a more accurate description. The only thing you're missing is like the vomitorium of the Roman feast, but I think everything else is pretty much as a Roman feast would be. So you have these kind of alcoves or kind of half rooms that are kind of scattered, which are lined up along a kind of huge banquet, where the first room you'll go into will be like the English dinner kitchen. So you'll have everything from Yorkshire puddings to ham to turkey to beef, every kind of meat, every kind of type of potato, gratin, so on. Then you go to the next kitchen and it will be the Indian kitchen. So you'll have every type of curry. Then you go to the next kitchen, it will be the Thai food. The next one will be seafood. The next one will be the bread kitchen, and so on and so on. Literally every cuisine you can possibly think of. But then what's particularly spectacular is the dessert kind of space that they have, which is every kind of dessert imaginable. So essentially you're just sitting there all day. You don't go for the bread first because you want to get your money's worth with the, don't want to fill up on the bread when there's lobster. So, you know, typical Irish mentality. So anyway, so you're led to your table and you're just drinking, going up, picking away, up and down the tables, chatting to friends, and your glass just never empties, whatever your, you know, champagne or whatever it is. And then you realize these people, you know, that the staff are almost invisible, but they're just constantly topping you up. So you somehow sort of leave 6 or 7 hours later, that's like a bag of wet cement full of food and alcohol, and you're wondering, I only had a glass of wine, I never actually got to the bottom of it. So, but it's just utter indulgence. So the bit I'm going to read is actually just about the dessert kitchen, and Trevor in this scene, who is new to this, is taking his nephew Rocco to pick out something sweet to eat, but Rocco has always lived in Dubai. Behind the fountains, Trevor gazes at the rows of mini cakes, 10, 20, 30, easily 50 varieties. Half of these names he couldn't even pronounce. Morsels of flaked chocolate, glazed summer fruits, lemon, strawberry and chocolate mousses, blackberry tartlets with vanilla-flavoured mascarpone cream, flaky and shortbread pastries, fruit tarts, salted caramel croquant brioche, fresh fruit flutes, eclairs, perfectly rounded macaroons in a rainbow of colours, gold leaf chocolate cakes, gianduja filled profiteroles with double chocolate sauce and toasted hazelnuts. A crepe stand, chocolate syrup, banana nuts, sprinkles, marshmallows, honey, summer fruit, Beside it, an ice cream stand, mint, mocha, praline, divine vanilla, choco orange, pistachio, rum and raisin. Trevor's plate remains empty as he looks, unable to move. Where to start? Other diners seem to be having the same trouble. What will I choose, darling? That looks delicious. I'm such a pig. Rocco has no problem picking ice cream flavours and crepe toppings. Maybe that's the secret. To be comfortable in Dubai, you have to be born there.
Such a fabulous portrayal of, yeah, the sheer excess of that. Do you think we'll be meeting any of these characters in your future fiction? Are there any of them that you're planning on returning to, or have you told their stories and that's them done now?
I started a new book because actually this book was essentially beyond editing, just with the editor really for the last couple of years, kind of getting it right. But I'd started a new book that had been in my mind for a few years, and actually some of the elements of this book I wanted to do something quite different, which was I wanted to challenge myself in a new way to stay with the character and stay with them over a few decades. I wanted to move away. This book, because of the tight window frame or window of time, relied a lot on kind of flashback and jumping in and out of time sequence. So I kind of set myself the challenge of, can I write a book essentially without doing that at all and just stay one scene and then move to the next scene, you know, kind of through a character's life without really kind of referring back in such a strong way. I'd say what will come out of this book, which will probably be in anything I write, is all of these characters have their neuroses, which are all my neuroses. I realize I have them all, like Pokemon. I think people have gone, oh, is that, especially friends who've read the book and go, oh, is that me? Or is that? I'm like, no, literally every single neurotic tendency that every character has in this book is my neuroses. So, and I'm definitely seeing again, what will reappear is more of the neurotic. So no, they're not reappearing, but I think there's the same approach to writing, which is start with character and let the character tell the story is probably just the way I write, and that will stay.
You have taught writing as well, Jamie, haven't you? Can you talk to us a little bit about that, maybe?
I taught in UCD after I actually finished my MFA there, and then after that, UCD they have a partnership with the University of Iowa where the students come over from there and do a semester here. So I was teaching fiction on that, kind of with a focus on the Irish. They come to Ireland to really focus on the Irish, either novel or poetry. So focusing on the Irish novel. So I have to say, I really love it. Like, I mean, it's something that I really am passionate about, and I feel like I talk all day. But anything I do is really drawn out of, as I said, the master's, the MFA, and then kind of teaching. Everyone who teaches brings their own approach to how they, if someone asks me to teach a plot workshop, it's probably going to start with finding a character's voice and using that approach. And, as I said, asking questions like, what's their Achilles heel? What's the thing that's going to, disrupt them? Because any of the rules I taught, I feel have somewhere in books out there, the rules are broken, except when it comes to character. I think character is one of those things that you would really struggle to hold a reader unless the character holds them somewhere, is compelling. They don't have to be likable, but they do have to be compelling. They have to have a drive or something that, or sometimes even if they're just self-aware, they can be horrible but self-aware, and that's enough for the reader to forgive them, and you'll stay with them. So that's definitely my approach. I'm teaching a course this autumn, and really of the 8 weeks, the first two are just purely working on character, voice for the first one, and then the second thing I'm really interested in is memory, because I feel memory is key to understanding life. One of the things I do is, and they always get nervous because they can't believe the question that I'm asking. And so I'll be sitting at a desk or, a table it would have been UCD, and I'd ask them, what is this? What is this? And they're all kind of like, you can't be asking me what this is. And I'm like, it's a table. And they're like, it's a table. And they're, okay. So it's like, how do you know that's a table? And they're sitting there still puzzled, and I'm kind of going, somewhere in your memory, it was repeated to you as a child, that is a table. And so you now know it's a table. So the only reason you logically know that's a table is due to a memory. But I said, if, let's say I had that table and you ate a feast off it every day for 50 years, and I just skip out the back, and that table was a happy table for you, and I was about to throw it in, you'd probably feel a pang of like, oh, don't throw away that, you'd have an emotional engagement with it. Whereas if you've been tied to the table and tortured, and someone said, I'm going to throw that in the skip, you'd probably be like, I'll help you do it. So every object in life not only has a logical memory, but it has an emotional memory. And the more you can kind of understand that, then you start picking objects and scenes and settings more as a film director than, well, that happened there in real life, so it now has to happen there in the same way in my story, And I think if you can pull students away from this need to be so close to reality and realize how artificial what they're doing is.
I love that idea of choosing objects as if we're a film director. I love that. So please carry on.
Yeah. Well, I just think, especially with the film director, if we watch anything, especially if it's a set built and there's a book on a coffee table, that hasn't accidentally landed there. Like, the director wanted that particular book to be there, so it means something, And it was funny, I was reading Snowflake, the Louise Nealon at the moment, and she occasionally mentions like books the characters liked or films. She selected all of these objects for an effect. One of the characters talks about their favorite book in childhood, and it's Alice in Wonderland. And this book has her own book feels like Alice in Wonderland in parts, where you can't quite trust the narrator and she's missing bits of her memory. And I thought, she didn't pick Enid Blyton, she picked Alice in Wonderland. That's being the director as a writer,
I love that, the idea that we are the gods of these worlds that we make, and we can do whatever we want with it.
I think you have to set up your rules of the world. And the rule can often be, the worldview is one of optimism about human nature, or one that isn't optimistic about human nature. I read Donald Ryan's last book, The Strange Flowers, last year, and he sets up a world where people are inherently good for the most part, and there's a certain beauty in that, and I found it beautiful to read for that reason. But for me, I set up a world where Dubai is chaotic, where things don't always turn out for the best. So actually, when it came to the end of the book, I'd set up a set of rules that said this world was kind of chaotic and hard to control. I couldn't put a bow on the end of it. It would have been as breaking the rules as if one of the characters flew. Do you know what I mean? It would have just totally gone against the rules of the book. So a couple of people have texted me afterwards and gone, so what happened? But I do know what happened. I wrote from a point of view of knowing that, obviously her death, I know what happened to her death, but for me, it wasn't kind of almost the point of the book, but I couldn't wrap it up in such a way that all 7 characters are now, went to a wedding and it all worked out, it just.
During the pandemic, you set up blackwaterwriting.com. Tell us a bit about that.
Finished up kind of working, I suppose, in publishing, and I had accidentally moved to Kerry last March because my partner John is from Kenmare, and like I was living in Dublin, and we talked about that I'd ultimately come down here, and I was quite happy to go live in the countryside and hopefully do a bit of writing. But I suppose just with everything being the way it was, everything was moving online, I was in the countryside, and it just was an opportunity for me to try something new and really draw on, I suppose, the academic experience of teaching, the publishing experience, and then obviously working as a writer as well. I just want to kind of combine those 3 elements and offer something to emerging writers out there. And one of the big things, I loved my MA in creative writing, and I actually have a bad word to say about it, but one thing that I learned more of since leaving, and I wanted to kind of go, this is really helpful to students, is actually about the publishing industry, because I think publishing is where business and art collide. And that there's a tension there, and there's definitely a tension there, and I found myself to know how it works definitely probably helped with my mental health more than anything else, because you start to realize how it's a business, and quite often decisions aren't necessarily as personal as you think they are. They often are, it's capitalism, it's enterprise, and people have to feel they can make a book work on every level before they could say yes to it. So I think even just knowing how well, firstly, how sincere everyone is behind the curtain, so to speak, you know, and people are really excited about finding a great book and talking about it and sharing it with colleagues. But there does come to this point, you know, like you go into a publishing meeting and every team is there, you know, so you have the editorial team, you have the sales team, the publicity team, possibly the rights team, or, you know, someone representing each and kind of bringing in, we can do something with this book, we can make this book work, you know. And so the decision is a really nuanced one. And I just know myself, before knowing this, you know, you get a rejection and you'd be like, they hated the book, it's a piece of rubbish, or they hated the story, I'm going to throw it in the skip. And actually, it's often much more common. That is merely them saying they can't do it justice. You know, it's not that. I definitely found myself much more. It was much less personal after working in the industry. But I suppose, want to bring some of that experience to kind of Blackwater writing. I set it up last year, offering a range of, I suppose, services, kind of offering editorial advice based on the kind of editorial advice I'd have offered students a few years ago, and some bit of mentoring and some sort of online classes. But actually, as the years gone on, I've realized I really love teaching. That's where my passion is. I found if I edit someone and I do extensive notes and I write things in the margins, and then, you know, they may come back to me in 6 months' time and want more editing, and I feel I'd rather be making people independent writers rather than dependent on me writers. Do you know what I mean? So I found I get much more rewarding or much more satisfaction out of, I suppose, you know, teach a man to fish versus, you know, giving them a fish. So as the years gone on, that's where the rewards come from me. So I've actually rejigged the website in the last 3 weeks, and it's purely now a teaching, an offering for teaching. So I'm going to run a course a couple of times a year, just purely based on the modules that I'd have taught previously on kind of the Irish novel, with a focus on creative writing. And as I said, two of the modules are purely on character, and then also 2 of the modules will have a focus on the publishing industry as well, and submissions and how it all works, because it's a handy thing to have in your tool belt. I just used to think, like, until this last decade, I would walk into a bookshop and I just assume, like, what, pixies put the books on shelves? I don't know, like, I didn't actually realize, like, the process of manuscript, letter, you know, goes into editor, editorial assistant reads it, decides whether or not they'll bring it to a publishing meeting discussed, everyone brings their notes, sales bring in projected sales figures, publicity brings in what they think, you know, how they can pitch this book and sit it in the market, rights will talk about rights, you know, and they'll all generally, editorial will then talk about whether or not the book is, you know, they loved it, or on just purely on the book itself. Then an offer is made, and then you've like cover and editorial, and then it goes through all the processes probably for about 18 months. You know, being sent out proofs to booksellers, you know, 6 monthly presentations to booksellers, presentations to media, and then finally this huge distribution system which sends the books everywhere, and it finally ends up on a shelf. Like, it's such a machine, and I think to have a knowledge of that is a good thing as a writer.
Do you think that you can teach people to write fiction?
There's a couple of stumbling blocks that prevent people, as I see it, from learning how to write fiction. Firstly, like, I cannot sing. So I know that. So I will not put the years of time into something which I categorically know, even if I train really hard for 10 years, at best, I will be satisfactory. So when you kind of know that you have no potential of being actually good at something, it's very hard to remain motivated to get good at it, if you know what I mean. So I think you cannot teach someone the will to write. I mean, people go, oh, I'd love to write a book, but like, writers write. Like, are you writing? Even if it's not good at this stage or not at the level you will one day be, you need to be writing. And excuses just, if you're making excuses 10 years in, it's obviously not this moment in your life when you should be writing. You know, it's maybe just stop torturing yourself and maybe go, look, it's not for now, and come back to it. But I don't think you can teach that will to like sit down day in, day out and get words down. I think to learn how to write, something I've learned myself, and I had learned the hard way, was you need a certain amount of humility as well to learn how to write, because during my master's, and it's actually, I've tried to get very conscious of when I'm doing it, is when I got critique, I had a tendency to resist it or, you know, make a discussion out of it. And these would be people who've like, you know, people with 5 and 6 books and they're very successful authors. And I'm, you know, they would say something. I remember actually my teacher, Ailish Nagrivno, reviewed my work and she was always so kind, but she was talking about my use of fragments, which actually, even in this book, I've realized I probably would use more fragments in Diving for Pearls than I would use now. I've slowly been weeding them out over the years. But I remember at the time trying to argue to her, that's my style. And that wasn't my style. That just is really hard for a reader to read. You know, that's, you know, it's absolutely, there's nothing wrong with fragments, but if you totally overuse them, it becomes very difficult. So, and what I became very aware of through trial and error and actually just trying something I didn't expect was the things I was really resisting. If I'd just shown humility to the people who recommended that I try them out, I probably could have saved myself a lot of time and become a, you know, a better writer for that. And the other massive one, I don't mean to like eating all the time here, Danielle, was I did a workshop with Alistair MacLeod. I was so at the time a Celtic Tiger, know-it-all 20-something-year-old, and I was like, this is such an interesting time in Ireland. I'm going to capture the reality of Ireland as I've experienced it as a young person growing up in the boom years. And I remember him doing this at Exercise, and he said, what were you doing on this day last year? And whatever it was. Of course, we all had the same reaction in the workshop. And he said, exactly. That's because reality is boring. Don't write about it. And that's where I've talked about reality here, but actually that seed about reality that he taught me in that workshop, which was everything I resisted, because I was all thinking like, you know, I'm writing about this interesting age I live in. But actually, the more that has sunk in over the last 12 years and gone, you know, reality is not fiction at all. They just mimic each other, has massively improved my writing. And I resisted it for so long. So I think as students, if you can have humility to look at the things you're resisting, advice you're being given, you have a much better chance of progression. I know there was it's a quote that another one that I think I try to impart to my students, and it's not my own, but it's actually James Ryan, who, when I did the master's early on in the course, he said, fiction is a work of the imagination for the imagination. And the key there is for the imagination. And your job with the words, I found, is not to actually tell the story. The story exists between your words, and the words are only signposts. And what I mean by that is, even in a small way, you know, if I was to say to you, John walked across the room to the sink, water poured down over his fingers, you immediately fill in the blanks of that story. Whereas if I say to you, John walked over to the sink, John reached up, John turned the handle of the tap, he put his hands under the tap, water flowed down over the tap, over his fingers. The one with all that extra detail removes the little space between those two sentences that is the imagination, because you've told everything and stated it, and it no longer is interesting. So seeing the gaps in between words as a little leap from one thing to the next, there's a little imagination between each sentence and each paragraph, and actually getting really used to the fact that not telling everything and then seeing more the words as signposts that are leading the reader through a journey of their own, rather than you telling a journey, makes the writing less boring, I find.
Do you edit your own work very finely, or do you get a lot of help in your editing, I suppose? Because it strikes me about what you're saying is that you actually look very carefully at your manuscript before you send it anywhere.
And it's funny, as I said, even reading it today, I could see little tweaks I would make to it even after this. That would have gone through, not rewrites, but definitely good edits. Maybe, I think about 16 different kind of rounds of polishing, and definitely I think with short stories, there's no room to really not do that, you know. And I suppose I'm realizing more that I'm probably more a novelist, and that I do think of character and staying with the character, you know, in terms of story in a bigger way. And I feel I'm slowly moving to my comfort zone in terms of how I'm going to probably write for the next while, if you know what I mean. But no, I would edit. I think if I reach a point when I'm editing because I'm tired or for whatever reason, and I feel something like something's not right here and I don't know what it is, and I feel that tendency of, sure, that'll do. Oh my God, like step away from the manuscript, like step away from the laptop. That little that'll do is the thing that is holding you back from moving your writing up a gear, you know, and to the next level. I think I really try to go attuned to, I know I've learned all the rules, but now I read and I'm like, it's almost like a piece of music. You're like, there's something off with that note, you know, that there's something, and you're trying to figure out, is it the commas in the sentence, you know, or what's the word in the sentence that reads like a bad note in music? And even as I'm reading, when I read it out loud, it's the same thing from reading it out loud. You start to notice those little off-key moments, you know, in terms of emotional, whatever the reason is. So, but no, I wouldn't send something out until I was fairly sure that I'd done all I could with it.
We have a free book raffle happening today. So if you'd like to check our Twitter page at Fiction Friary or our Facebook page, Fiction at the Friary, you'll find details on how to enter that free book raffle. We're hugely grateful to Jamie O'Connell for having such a wonderful and wide-ranging chat with us today, and for reading from Diving for Pearls, which we can vouch is a fabulous read and we highly recommend it. So thank you so much, Jamie, for coming to talk to us.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Danielle. It's been really, really interesting and really enjoyed the chats. Thank you.
Been lovely to talk to you, Jamie. Thank you so much. Thanks, Danielle. And hopefully we will at some point be back in real life in the Friary Bar, but in the meantime, we'll be back again next month.